The judges have spent over 5,000 hours reading 129 books. In 30 minutes, we'll know who has won Britain's most prestigious literary award, the last Booker Prize of the 20th century. Good evening and welcome to the Guildhall in London, where the competition for the 31st Booker Prize for Literature has narrowed to 6 novels. For Indian-born Anita Desai, it's her 3rd time on the Booker shortlist with Fasting, Feasting. For Michael Frayn, author of Headlong, it's first time round after 40 distinguished years of novels, plays and journalism. The Blackwater Lightship is Colm Tóibín's 4th novel, but the first to make the shortlist. Egyptian-born Adhaf Soueif is, for many, the surprise contender with the longest book on the list, The Map of Love. Journalist and critic Andrew O'Hagan is through to the last round with his first novel, Our Fathers. And there's one absentee tonight, South African J.M. Coetzee, who won the Booker Prize in 1983 for The Life and Times of Mackay and is in contention again with Disgrace. All 6 are waiting on the verdict from the Booker jury. 5 critics, writers and academics under the chairmanship of Labour MP Gerald Kaufman. But tonight, they'll also be hearing a second verdict. Across town, at Waterston's bookshop in Piccadilly, Channel 4 has assembled a special People's Jury. They're waiting to give their view on the Booker and the shortlist with Muriel Gray.
Well, no academics or critics here, just ordinary readers. We have a lawyer from London, a florist from Cannock, a library reader in residence from West Yorkshire, a telecoms consultant from Hampshire and a clinical psychologist from Bradford. And together they'll be asking one question. What, if anything, in the Booker Prize shortlist appeals to them?
The critical consensus earlier this year was that the Booker Prize was a done deal. A fight between Salman Rushdie's The Ground Beneath Her Feet and An Equal Music by Vikram Seth. But neither of them actually made the shortlist, like many others. What emerged was a list which combined some familiar names with some new voices. Fasting, Feasting by Anita Desai is a tale of cultures in conflict and of an Indian woman who's forced to stay at home, imprisoned by the outdated attitudes of her family.
A career, leaving home, living alone. These troubling secret possibilities now entered Uma's mind. They were like seeds dropped on the stony, arid land that Uma inhabited. They sprouted forth the idea, run away, escape.
Adhaf Soueif's The Map of Love spans history to tell of 2 linked love affairs in Cairo. The modern American heroine of the book falls in love with an Egyptian. Her relationship is paralleled by that of her ancestor, whose story is told through recently discovered journals.
Looking up from Anna's journal, I am, for a moment, surprised to find myself in my own bedroom, her trunk standing neatly by the wall. I had been so utterly in that scene, in my great-grandmother's harem lick. My heart had beaten in time with Anna's. My lips had wanted her lover's kiss.
Our Fathers by Andrew O'Hagan is set in a Glasgow of strong drink, tall buildings and socialist ideals. Hugh Bourne is a visionary architect who led Scotland's building programme after the war. But now his utopian tower blocks are collapsing, together with the socialist principles he still holds dear.
At moments, I still see the beauty in those towers. A thing of wonder. They stretch to the skies. They stand for how others had wanted to live, for the future they saw, and for hopes now abandoned.
The Blackwater Lightship by Colm Tóibín explores the impact of modern sexuality, not least homosexuality, on rural Catholic Ireland. Lighthouses and the sea provide a symbolic backdrop to the story of 3 generations of women forced to confront years of resentment.
When I was young, lying in bed in your granny's house, I used to believe that Tuskar was a man and the Blackwater Lightship was a woman, and they were both sending signals to each other and to other lighthouses, like mating calls. He was forceful and strong, and she was weaker, but more constant. And I thought they were calling to each other. It was very satisfying, him being strong and her being faithful. And all that turned out not to be true.
Michael Frayn's Headlong follows an art historian's farcical attempts to acquire what he believes is an undiscovered painting by Bruegel from an unsuspecting upper-crust rural neighbour.
What I'm contemplating is not the picture, but my accumulated recollection of it. It's as if the sun's emerging from the clouds and the world's changing in front of my eyes from grey to golden. I can feel the warmth of the sunlight spreading over my skin, passing like a wave of beneficence through my entire body.
Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee is a sombre book set in the new South Africa, in which a university professor is forced into exile after a callous affair with a student, only to see his daughter gang-raped on a rural homestead. The story charts his descent into self-loathing. He whiles away his time trying to finish an opera about Byron and putting down unwanted dogs at a local clinic. He ends up scarcely distinguishable from an unwanted dog himself.
Of the dogs in the holding pens, there is one he has come to feel a particular fondness for. It is a young male with a withered left hind quarter, which it drags behind it. No visitor has shown an interest in adopting it. Its period of grace is almost over. Soon it will have to submit to the needle.
If Coetzee wins, he'll be the first author in the Booker's 31-year history to win the prize twice.
Well, there's always controversy about the shortlist every year. Romy, has this set your heart alight?
I think what's interesting for me about this shortlist is that some of the biggies, the front runners, have been knocked out at the early stages. So people like Vikram Seth, people like Salman Rushdie, people like Roddy Doyle are out of the running, and it clears the way for people who maybe aren't as well known and so established. I think that's what's important, is that there's a freshness there.
I don't think it's particularly fresh. I mean, they've got a nice selection of what's fashionable at the moment. They've got something by an Indian female author, which has been fashionable for a couple of years and is still fashionable. They've got something from South Africa. They've got something from Egypt, which again has political undertones. They've got a lot of books that deal with the family and family relationships. And I take what Romy says about the fact that the front runners have been pushed aside, but I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So you could just take a book for a book.
Bob, would you agree with that?
It's hard to say without reading the big works, if you like, without having read the Rushdie or the Vikram Seth. But my feeling about these was, with one or two exceptions, these were good, professionally written novels. But there wasn't a big book here. There wasn't something I felt I would press on my friends and say, you must read this. This is a tremendously exciting book.
There's possibly two books I'd actually say to people it's worth spending your hard-earned money on. The rest I'd say don't touch with the barge pole.
But the feeling they're getting from you is that it's often been criticised in the past of being elitist, but in a way you're saying it isn't even that. It's just it's quite mundane.
Mediocre.
Yeah.
Perhaps we're expecting too much of the whole process, because what comes out at the end is as a result of compromise and a group of people reaching an agreement about the books that would be most acceptable to them as top of the list. I mean, I have difficulty with the idea that you will have one book that is the best for that year.
I don't know if we should be criticising the books or the prize. I mean, it sounds as though we're being very critical, and I think of the 6 books, having discussed them amongst ourselves, there were at least 3 or 4 that we would all think were good books. But if these are supposed to be the 6 best novels in the English language, excuse me, this year, then you have to be a little bit disappointed, I think.
Just more generally about the prize itself, is it living up to the kind of prestige that we give it? I mean, that's really the question.
The Booker Prize gets more publicity than anyone else. The Booker Prize is the prize that people take note of. It's simply because it's in all the press and it's in the media for weeks.
I work for the library service in West Yorkshire, so we will get queues of people who will come up and reserve the Bookers that have won. So yes, I think it's important. I think it's a name that people look out for. It sells books. I think this is an important thing.
A lot of people are wondering whether the Booker is going to continue, actually, because there's been so much argument about it in the last few years. Would you want this to continue? Is it worthwhile?
I would have liked to have seen one of the self-published books put forward just to be a bit of a cat amongst the pigeons. That would have, in the same way as electronic literature shortly will have to bear an influence, because there's more and more things on the internet that you can actually, and that's the way that the publishing world is going, as opposed to self-congratulatory, pat on the back, what can we shove forward to try and boost sales, which is really what it's become in the past 5 years. So
I can't imagine they're going to stop the Booker Prize because people are arguing about it. I imagine if people stop arguing about it, that'd be a reason to cut it.
So that's the attraction or otherwise of the Booker Prize for Channel 4's jury of readers, but its impact and importance for the book industry is inevitably much greater, or is it?
Over the years, the Booker Prize has rarely failed to make literary waves. It's confirmed some great reputations, like Kingsley Amis, and launched a few careers, like former bus driver Magnus Mills. But the Booker is a boon to publishers looking to shift the more literary novel.
When Roddy Doyle's Paddy Clark Ha 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 won 27,000 copies sold within the first half hour of the Booker Prize being announced.
Given the stakes, you'd imagine the competition among publishers as they submit their allotted 2 books would reach Oscar pitch. But not in the sedate, rather civilised world of the British book scene.
I have forgotten on one occasion to enter a book for the Booker Prize, but on the whole it's very difficult to do that because you're under so much pressure. This is the prize of prizes.
There are rumours, of course, that some major authors have Booker entry written into their contracts. But inevitably, the greatest speculation surrounds the judging process itself.
The Booker Prize is very good at determining an outright winner, but there have been years which smell like compromises. A lot of people talk about Amsterdam and McEwan last year really only emerged as a compromise.
So perhaps the Booker only reflects the books that bother to turn up.
Well, all of which I suppose raises an inevitable question. So, members of the jury, are there other books, for instance, that you think should be on the shortlist, or other types of books, perhaps even non-fiction, that are crying out to be read? Ramona, for instance, what do you think?
I think one of the best books I've read this year is Vikram Sit and Equal Music, which is a beautifully written book about a musician who lives in London, and it's a story of his music and a love story at the same time.
Bizarrely didn't make the list. Incredible.
Bizarre.
Do you think anything on the shortlist is better than that?
No, I don't at all think anything's better than this.
I think there are at least 2 or 3 books that on the shortlist that are actually better than Equal Music. So again, perhaps it comes down to personal preference.
What have you chosen?
The Pianist, it's non-fiction. It's about a Polish Jew clinging to the threads of life in Warsaw and who ultimately survives because of the help of a German officer.
Richard?
Stalingrad. Anthony Beevor, absolutely unputdownable, takes it down to the basic level of the troops fighting the battle that basically won the Second World War.
Romy, what about yourself?
This is absolutely wonderful. This is The Long Firm by Jay Carno. It's absolutely disgraceful that this wasn't on the shortlist for me. It's Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels with Knobs on.
Bob?
I go for non-fiction as well. Into Thin Air by John Krakauer describes a disastrous Everest expedition in 1996. Fantastic story, and really all human life is there. Courage, ambition, betrayal. It's just a fantastic read.
So again, it's interesting that you've chosen non-fiction there. What's going on here? Are there just the stories not happening in fiction? Why? Why is this so attractive as opposed to the novel?
I think if you compare a number of the non-fiction bestsellers over the last year or two, they have a tremendous narrative strength and even a very powerful characterisation, which you don't often find, or don't always find in a contemporary novel.
Do you think we're being let down by fiction writers, Jenny?
I've certainly moved away from reading fiction so much in recent years and into non-fiction. And again, I think it's the power of stories actually being increased by the fact that they are true and they're not filtered through somebody else's imagination.
I would disagree with
that
something like this. I mean, this starts off with the ex-lover of the main protagonist in the book having a red-hot poker held to his face, and I kind of don't think that actually, for me, I can get more gripping than this at the beginning of a book, you know, straight in there.
And your disappointment of authors like J. Carno being left off the shortlist, have you an explanation for that?
I don't know what's happened in terms of this, because I mean, certainly when I've seen press and publicity, they certainly would categorise this as a literary novel. So, you know, it should be with the contenders as much as this. It's just superb, it's gripping, it's got a plot, it drives it all the way through. Something like this, for me, apart from, say, 1 or 2 on the shortlist, really does clean the floor.
I just find it very interesting, Richard, that you've chosen not only one that's a bestseller already, but it's a non-fiction that seems to have captured the public's imagination. I mean, there are lots of other war books that are fictional. Why is that more exciting than them?
I think it makes it more intense because it actually shows how the human spirit can survive the most adverse conditions and come out on top at the end of the day. You read a book like this and you just think, I'd like to imagine what it was like but I can't, but here's the information, put forward almost like a shopping list.
Really? But is that not the fiction writer's job to make you feel that?
I think there's an interesting spillover between fiction and non-fiction. In two of the books on the shortlist, they were heavily informed by a sort of like erudite approach. There was art history, politics in the map of love, and this is very common in fiction now as well. That they're bolstered and boosted, if you like, by a non-fiction element, a true element, if you like.
Well, so according to Channel 4's People's Jury, the Booker Prize may not always capture the popular mood, however prestigious it is. But what about the reading public as a whole? Channel 4 has commissioned its own exclusive survey into the state of reading in Britain today.
Channel 4 surveyed hundreds of readers in bookshops and on the internet. The results suggest that the majority of readers, 30%, tackle more than 40 books a year, and 11% read more than 100. Original fiction is still the favourite form of reading. 2/3 of those surveyed prefer it. 58% of people regard the Booker Prize as relevant, and 28% of people would go out of their way to read the Booker Prize winner. We also asked readers to nominate their books of the year. In third place, Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee, the favourite for the Booker this year. In second place, another novel from the Booker shortlist, Headlong by Michael Frayn. But the book of the year in Channel 4's exclusive national poll is what's become the publishing phenomenon of the year, J.K. Rowling's latest Harry Potter novel, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Here at the Guildhall, the 400 guests are nearing the end of their first course. Mille-feuille of griddled aubergines, sweet peppers and courgettes with goat's cheese. And looking forward to medallions of British Aberdeen Angus beef. The winner of the 99 Booker Prize will be announced in about a quarter of an hour. Join us for that after the ads. Hello again. We're live at the Guildhall in central London for the award of the last Booker Prize of the 20th century. In a moment, Channel 4's People's Jury will give its views on the 6 shortlisted novels. But first, we asked an anonymous critic if there's anything distinctive about the sort of book that tends to win the Booker Prize.
If you're an aspiring prize winner, it's worth writing with a few things in mind. Try to be foreign. 13 previous winners were non-British. Try to be historical. Try to be warlike. War stories have a habit of doing well. Don't be too experimental. The critics panned the Bone People. Make sure you have a big theme like the Holocaust or death. Don't write science fiction or thrillers or crime fiction or romances. Try to be a famous writer who has been inexplicably overlooked in the past. But try not to be Beryl Bainbridge, who's been inexplicably overlooked 5 times. So, overall, try to be a foreign writer with a not-too-experimental book featuring a war in an exotic setting and get a few big themes in. In fact, just try to be Salman Rushdie, whose Midnight's Children won the Booker of Bookers in 1993.
Well, except for the fact that Salman Rushdie didn't make it onto this year's shortlist, but Adhaf Soueif's The Map of Love, another weighty, exotic novel, did. Do you think it's worth being there at all? I mean, do you, Ramona?
Absolutely a worthy title. It was romantic, had a great storyline, it had parallel stories going back to the turn of the century and to now, and it was also quite political, which was quite interesting. And you saw the Middle Eastern problem from a Middle Eastern perspective. I thought it was very good.
Romy, you're shaking your head horribly there.
Absolutely not. I mean, it should be used as a door stopper and nothing else. I just found it like wading through treacle. There was that, and it was like...
The story was so uplifting.
But if I could get to it, I mean, the point is that I want to be able to get to the story. I felt that, you know, you chopped and changed around. At the beginning we had Anna's diary, then we had Amal talking. You had to work out who Amal was, first of all. Then you had a third-person narrator in there. And it was so confusing that I got lost. in the sheer volume of it.
It felt like a bit of a word processor book, I thought. I'm always a bit suspicious of books that require other devices to help you through, such as a family tree at the front and different typefaces to remind you of who's talking when and all these kinds of things.
I think the family tree was very helpful and it was very useful.
But if the writing had been strong enough, that wouldn't have been required, I don't think. And even at page 300, I was still going back to the family tree to remind myself who is who.
But you're still a fan of it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Richard?
I think she attempted something very complex and difficult and almost pulls it off. Definitely worthy of being a shortlisted book, but a winner, doorstop, yes, but only after you've read it.
Well, moving on then, Headlong, Michael Frayn. He's been around for 40 years, writing plays, books, what have you. Do you think this particular book merits being what it is?
It was a pleasure to read something that has humour in it. There's novelty in all 6 books. There's some cracking bits in there. You think that is actually humour, and you can see where his background has come into that.
Well, would you agree that, would you agree that the humour, I mean, I agree with you, the humour's great, but we could have done with a little less on the lecturing.
I found the art history section potentially tedious, but it was necessary to make it right at the end, the whole plot relevant. It all comes together right at the end. Very cleverly done, very smoothly written.
I thought in some ways it felt like a dishonest book. There was an excellent 200-page comic novel lurking in the middle of it, but really a kind of Tom Sharp, and no shame in that. Very funny sort of rural farce, and it felt as though it was being bolstered up with all this erudite art history, and it didn't feel to me as though that was necessary to drive the plot along. You needed to know the value of the painting. You didn't need to know all the historical context.
Jenny, how did you feel about it? I mean, do you think, for instance, even the drawing of the characters, the upper-class twits and these impoverished academics, were they real? Were they three-dimensional to you? Did it work?
I think they were stereotypes. I think it was too predictable. You knew that he was going to come out badly in the end and make a complete mess of everything. So from that point of view, it wasn't clever in that way. It didn't have any twists to add to it.
And you say there's no twist, but right at the very end, he runs off with the wrong picture, and then he's got to go back and get it, and he's being chased. It's like a St. Trinian's farce in the dark. I mean, I just thought, please just make this into a film. Cut out the art history detective story, make a film out of it, and away we go.
I think it would be a very good film.
OK, well, let's move on. Anita, Desai, Romy, Fasting, Feasting.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting book. I found the whole kind of discussion around, what is feasting and what is fasting in 2 different cultures, in Western and Eastern cultures. I mean, what's the difference there? I felt that, in one culture it was about religious devotion, fasting, and yet it was about anorexia and bulimia and eating disorders that we kind of saw through Melanie's character in the USA, who didn't eat. The women in the family, American family, didn't eat.
Bob, do you think it worked? Because obviously what she was trying to do.
Yeah, I actually really liked this book, although I thought it was very flawed. I thought it messed around for 60 pages and then it sort of hit a groove and started rolling. There was 100 pages in the middle which really drove along, and I thought those 100 pages included actually the best writing almost of all 6 books. It really worked for me.
Richard, poetic delight for you?
Absolutely not. 2 totally unconnected short stories thrown together for the purpose of entering the Booker Prize. Total drivel. Irrelevant, pointless, unrealistic, characters one-dimensional, and you've got the father who unconvincingly gets duped into 2 arranged marriages for his daughter twice. I mean,
he's the father I felt sorry for.
I mean, he's a lawyer, for goodness sakes, and yet not only does he get done once, he gets done twice. I mean,
but to me,
Mr.
that was
Stupid
where the
or
farce came in, the humour came in there.
No, that's where the bad writing came in.
OK, well, moving on to Our Fathers then. What did you make of that?
Well, I was impressed by Our Fathers. It's a bleak book, but I really focused on the family relationships and all the damage and the pain over the years in those relationships. I was absorbed right from the start. I think it's a fairly simple style. It did get poetic at times.
When you say poetic, you don't feel that it ever got verbose. It was rather overwritten, rather pretentious, rather self-conscious.
Florid.
Bob, yes,
florid is the word. I must say I didn't like it at all. I thought it was a very, very bleak, monochrome portrayal of central Scotland. I'm sure it's not sponsored by the Scottish Tourist Board. It doesn't do it any favours at all. No, but very bleak, very, very miserable, very downbeat. I was glad to put it down.
I don't want to read another book that deals with problems in the family. You know, there was no story. There was no story to the book. It was just simply, you know, this relationship with the
his
son and the father and the grandfather.
So there is a story. The grandfather's dying at the backdrop of, you know, the demolition of the very flats that he fought to create. I felt it was. I mean, it said a lot about, in terms of politically, New Labour. I mean, what, you know, the Labour Party, which my family have always been staunch supporters of, people are beginning to question, well, what is Labour? And I felt it began to raise those issues for me.
Well, there's a lot of dysfunctional families in the shortlist. So moving on to Blackwater Lightship, Bob, another of the same.
Yeah, it's a kind of mildly dysfunctional family, really. It's very good, I think, in terms of presenting the family pressure cooker, if you like. It's about 3 generations within one family, and they've all suffered variously from slights and grievances, but mostly relatively petty stuff. This isn't major child abuse or anything, but it's all festered and been allowed to accumulate. And that angle is extremely well played. The central theme is the younger brother Declan dying of AIDS, and it's all very dramatic.
Well, what about the aspect that, you know, the mother and the grandfather just suddenly learn that Declan is gay, and there's very little mention of his family. I think it might come up.
It's almost like it's like a soap opera almost. You know, I'm gay, I've got AIDS, I'm going to die. I hate you, I've always hated you. This is why I hate you, and there's all this emotional conflict.
But I think it's a lot subtler than that. Page 110 in the book, when Helen and her mother, Helen's driving her mother into Wexford, and her mother gets out of the car, and it's near the sea, and she slams, you can see it, it's cinematic, she slams the car door and gets out, and she says, Helen's mother says to her, how long have you known that Declan has had friends like Paul? It's just subtle things.
This is a family that don't talk to each other.
That's right.
They keep everything hidden away.
They talk a lot, but not to each other.
So there's no communication.
They think a lot.
So even though Declan comes home, and he's a catalyst, they still don't communicate.
Yeah. Richard, did you feel it worked, Richard? I mean,
it works. There's a beginning, middle and an end, and the reconciliation between the 3 women in Declan's life can only happen, and then he can die, and it's almost like it's a release at the end. He's only allowing himself to die once they've sorted themselves out, and he can go peacefully.
Well, another dysfunctional family, Disgrace. What did you make of that?
Competently written.
Just competent?
Competent. Well, 17, 18 years down the line from winning the Booker, he should be doing a little bit better, but well-rounded book. There is a plot there, and it represents a microcosm of what's going on in South Africa today. So, good book.
Very good book. I mean, there is a plot there, and I think it's a good plot. You're automatically, from page 1, you're drawn into the mind of this character who, I think we'll all agree, was just this horrible, vile character. But, you know, it brings you into his mind, and you're almost drawn into believing why he acts in the way he does.
This is the professor who's been disgraced by having an affair with one of his students.
He is a despicable character, and yet the quality of the writing is such that Coetzee raises a kind of pity for him by the end. And at the end, his circumstances are utterly reduced. I mean, he's been attacked himself. He's reduced to basically living in dust. He's working in a kennels. I personally felt a great pity for the man, despite everything that I knew about him. I thought the writing was marvellous.
Jenny, did you think this was a very courageous book in some ways? Because, I mean, to make the protagonist so unlikable, and the whole book, in a way, to be very nihilistic, it's an act of some literary courage there, isn't it?
I think it was very good, and the working on the 2 levels of the personal story and then the political. And I also like particularly the characterisation of Praetus as a black man, and the complexity of him. It's not spelled out in detail, but getting the understanding that basically all of the old balances are thrown out of kilter, and there is a new era now.
Well, OK, it's discussion over and it's decision time, because earlier today we asked you to pull your votes and to pick a winner. So have you decided first on a chairperson?
Yeah.
Romy, and what was the winner?
The winner was Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee.
Yahoo!
Yeah. It was a tough decision. It was between Colm Tobin's The Blackwater Lightship, Headlong by Michael Frayn, but this came out as the one that we couldn't really technically fault. It kept us hooked from beginning to end.
It raised its head above the sea of mediocrity.
You're a very hard man to please, Richard. So in the view of the Channel 4 People's Jury then, the winner of the 1999 Booker Prize should be Disgraced by J.M. Coetzee. But time now to cross live to the Guildhall when the moment has arrived for Gerald Kaufman to give the verdict of the official Booker Prize jury. More fool them.
A first-rate novel was not enough. There was quite a number of first-rate novels which I enjoyed reading and which I admired. But I was looking for that something extra, something that took a novel out of the highly accomplished and into the very special, something that took a novel out of a genre and made it unique. Our shortlist demonstrated that there were several such novels in contention, and it was extremely difficult for us to decide on the winner. You may have noticed that we came in late, and you may have thought that that was due to some last-minute or prolonged wrangle. I have to reveal to you that it was neither of these things. It was because I couldn't tie my tie, and somebody had to do it for me. But it certainly added to the tension of the occasion, particularly for those who had to change their clothes after me. We looked at these books, and we looked at them from the point of view of people who recognized the responsibility that we carried, the responsibility of contributing to a corpus of work in English literature. It was, I tell you again, it was very difficult for us to arrive at a decision. All of the 6 shortlisted books had their advocates, and that shortlist was narrowed down as our evening's discussion continued. I won't say that we deadlocked, we didn't deadlock, but it was certainly agonizing for some of us not to be able to choose some of the books on the list. And I must say that when I saw the authors coming up to the table to collect their prizes, I felt a certain amount of responsibility for the fact that 5 of them were bound to be disappointing. I wish indeed that we had been able to name runners-up, and I wish that we had been able to provide extra prizes for runners-up. But there is only one prize, and we could only do it in one way. If we could have chosen a runner-up, then we would undoubtedly have given the runner-up award to Anita Desai and Fasting Feasting, a most beautiful novel, very moving, very funny, terribly illustrative of what happens to women in different parts of the world. But we were not able to do that. We were not able to award a runner-up prize. We narrowed it down, and in the end, we decided that the winner of the prize was J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace.
J.M. Coetzee is now the only person to win the Booker Prize twice. He can't be here tonight, he's in Chicago. The prize is being collected by his publisher, Jeff Mulligan from Second Wahlberg, and being presented, the £20,000 cheque, by John Napier, chairman of Booker plc.
J.M. Coetzee can't be with us tonight, he's in South Africa, but his editor, Jeff Mulligan, is going to come forward to accept the prize, a cheque from the Booker chairman, John Napier. Do you want to say something else?
Let's go over to Muriel Gray and the Channel 4 People's Jury for their reaction.
Well, you got it right. You got it absolutely right. Now, I know there was a lot of discussion the same way that the jury had a discussion there. Ramona, you must be a bit disappointed because you didn't put that at the top of your list.
I put it near the bottom of my list. I'm quite disappointed, but it was a very well-written book.
Yeah, Richard,
Congratulations.
you were the same. You didn't actually put this at the top of your list, but you were...
Safe decision. At the end of the day, the bit about the mediocrity in the sea came through.
It wasn't a safe decision. It was a difficult one to make. I think it was a book that dealt with some really, really gripping issues, and it's undeniably the book that shone out.
Yes, do you agree, Bob?
Absolutely terrific book, and I was very pleased with the special mention for Anita Desai too, which I thought had some great writing in it.
Did you? Although that was argued quite vociferously against that. Jenny, you must be pleased because I know that you fought very hard for this book.
It was a wise decision, and it's an interesting and well-written book, and it deserves to be the winner.
It's pretty exciting, though, isn't it? I mean, there was nothing touching it when you were arguing in the jury, when you were making your decision. And in a way, it's nice that the public, in this case, if you're representing the public, have made the same decision as quite an academic panel of judges. Does that rekindle your confidence in the booker?
Yeah, I think it's a radical decision that's been made, because I think it's you know, an acknowledgement of the movement that's going on with readers to kind of look at the fact that, you know, there are readers out there and they have an opinion, and I think that's been brought, you know, to the fore here, and I think that's important.
Yeah. It was certainly a clear winner at the 6. I wonder if we would have chosen the same shortlist of 6 if we'd had the 120 to look at. I'm rather glad we didn't. But
So it's obviously not a political decision this year either. I mean, politics was a small p because he wasn't even going to come, so it wasn't like services for literature to Michael Frayn or anything. And so that's quite admirable in a way.
But there are some quite heavy political issues within the book itself that I think it's a courageous decision to have chosen that particular book.
Well, well done all of you for choosing the same ones. Or do you know what they're talking about? And for an insight into how the Booker jury itself, though, made its decision, let's join Chairman Gerald Kaufman, who's talking to Melvyn Bragg.
Well, Gerald, what we like to hear most is that there was real horse trading, there was bitter infighting, rages and tantrums. That's what we want to hear about. Did this happen?
No, it didn't happen. It's one of the most peaceable processes I've ever gone through. Not a single word voice raised in anger, an acceptance by those who were not initially in favour of the winner, of the winner, and I wish it was always like that in the Labour Party.
I was going to say, you've chaired a lot of committees. Do you want to take this lot across to Westminster with you?
Well, I wish I could. Discussion on such a high level and the right decision.
Was Coetzee your favourite book?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. I might as well tell you that I decided months ago that this was the book that ought to win the prize.
It was a favourite book of the jury over at Waterstones too. Do you think that it would enhance the prize if American books, books written in English in the Americas were entered as well?
It would, Melvyn, but it would mean that a hell of a lot more books would have to be read, and we had to read 129, some of them twice or even 3 times.
But actually, if you open it up like that, don't you think that that could give it even more zest? Books, American books, when they're published in this country, use that as a limitation.
Well, some American books are wonderful, and I would be delighted to be able to include those in the book.
You're on record as saying what quite a number of people have said, Gerald, that why aren't more genre books entered or considered? Why aren't writers like Michael Dibdin and Ruth Rendell and Robert Harris and the Harry Potter books by J.K. Rowling and Christopher... We could all build our lists, thrillers, detectives. Why aren't they taken up and entered? Does that worry you that they aren't?
It does worry me, because if you mention Michael Dibdin's just had a book come out called Blood Rain, which is a first-rate book. And would undoubtedly have been advocated by me for the shortlist. I'm almost... we got one entered, which was a very good crime novel, but I don't want to belittle it. I've reviewed it very favourably, but it didn't quite make it.
Yeah. The press gets excited. What's your... You've read 129 books, novels. I mean, has it sickened you of fiction? Do you want to rest?
No. I've gone on reading novels since we finished. I was reading novels over the weekend. Once you've got an appetite for them, it's like going to see Hollywood musicals. Once you've got the appetite, you always go.
I know this is but it's just a short conversation. But taking the temperature of much of current literature around here in the Commonwealth, what's your take on it? Do you think does it surprise you? Is it as varied as you'd hope? Is it as rich as you hope?
I think it's incredible. I read novels anyhow. I read novels for pleasure, but to read so many and to understand how extraordinarily high the standard is, that was a real revelation to me.
So you might not go to quite as many movies and read more novels in the future, Gerald?
Well, I'll try to do both.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much to Gerald Kaufman and to everybody here at the Guildhall. From us, from the 31st Booker Prize, good night. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Will. Yeah.